The elegant Bluestone restaurant stood proudly in downtown Memphis, its warm lights casting a welcoming glow through the large windows on a busy Friday evening. Inside, Marcus Thompson adjusted his crisp black uniform and straightened his name tag, preparing for another shift at the upscale establishment where he worked for the past 6 years. At 32, Marcus was one of the most experienced waiters at Bluestone. His colleagues often sought his advice, and regular customers specifically requested his section. Standing at 6'2" with a gentle smile and kind eyes, he carried himself with quiet confidence that came from years of excellent service and genuine passion for his work. The restaurant's interior buzzed with the usual Friday night energy. The smell of freshly baked bread and seared steaks filled the air as Marcus checked his section, tables 15 through 22. He took pride in ensuring each table was perfectly set, with spotless silverware and precisely folded napkins. His attention to detail had earned him Employee of the Month multiple times. "Hey Marcus, can you help me with this wine service?" called Jenny, a new waitress who had started just 2 weeks ago. Marcus smiled and walked over to her section. That's who he was, always ready to help, always patient with newcomers. The other staff members often joked that he should be promoted to manager, but Marcus enjoyed the direct interaction with customers too much to consider it. As he demonstrated the proper wine pouring technique to Jenny, Marcus glanced at his watch, 6:30 p.m. The dinner rush would begin soon. The restaurant manager, David Chen, approached them with his usual clipboard in hand. "Marcus, I've got a full section coming your way tonight. The Reynolds family requested you specifically for their anniversary dinner." Marcus nodded, pleased that his regular customers thought so highly of him. The Reynolds had been coming to Bluestone for years, and he had served them countless times. They were the kind of customers who made his job worthwhile, respectful, friendly, and appreciative of good service. The kitchen door swung open as the head chef, Giovanni, called out the evening specials. "Listen up, everyone. Tonight's special is pan-seared sea bass with roasted fingerling potatoes and asparagus, finished with a lemon butter sauce." Marcus made mental notes, knowing customers would ask for his recommendations. As the evening began to unfold, Marcus moved with practiced ease between his tables. He had a system that never failed him: greet within 2 minutes, take drink orders, suggest appetizers, and always keep water glasses filled. His regulars often commented on how he made everything look effortless. At table 17, an elderly couple celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. Marcus brought them a complimentary champagne toast, earning grateful smiles and a warm "thank you, young man" from the husband. These were the moments that made him love his job, despite the occasional difficult customer. The restaurant's atmosphere was perfect. Soft jazz played in the background, conversations hummed at a pleasant volume, and the clink of glasses and silverware created that distinct restaurant melody. Through the windows, Marcus could see the sky turning purple as the sun set, casting long shadows across the dining room. Looking at his section layout for the evening, Marcus noticed a reservation for 6 people at 7:30 p.m. under the name Walsh. Something about the name seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. He had served thousands of customers over the years, and names often blurred together. Just then, David approached him again. "Marcus, heads up. Table 20 at 7:30. It's Diana Walsh's group. She's known to be demanding." The manager's hesitation told Marcus everything he needed to know. In the service industry, certain customers gained reputations, and not always for the best reasons. Still, Marcus remained optimistic. In his experience, even the most difficult customers could be won over with exceptional service and a genuine smile. He checked his watch again, 7:15 p.m. The evening had been smooth so far, and he intended to keep it that way. As he refilled water glasses at table 19, Marcus heard the front door open, bringing with it a burst of evening air and the sound of loud, entitled voices. He glanced up to see a group of well-dressed women entering the restaurant, led by a blonde woman in her 50s wearing an expression that suggested she already found something to complain about. Little did Marcus know, this particular group would turn his ordinary Friday night shift into something that would change not only his life, but also the conversations about respect and dignity in the service industry throughout the entire city. Diana Walsh swept into Bluestone Restaurant like she owned the place, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor. Her group of 5 friends followed closely behind, all dressed in expensive outfits that screamed ladies who lunch. The hostess, Sarah, greeted them with a professional smile, but Diana barely acknowledged her presence. "Walsh, reservation for 6, Diana announced, looking down at her phone instead of making eye contact. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently against the hostess stand as Sarah checked the reservation system. The other diners in the restaurant glanced over, some recognizing Diana from various country club events and charity functions where she was known for making scenes. "Yes, Mrs. Walsh, your table is ready in section 4, Sarah said, gathering menus. She led the group toward Marcus's section, where table 20 had been specially prepared. However, as soon as Diana saw where they were heading, her face twisted into a frown. "No, no, no," Diana interrupted, stopping abruptly. "I specifically requested James's section." Her voice carried across the restaurant, causing several nearby diners to look up from their meals. "James always serves us. Where is he?" Sarah politely explained, "I apologize, Mrs. Walsh, but James is off tonight. Marcus is handling this section, and he's one of our most experienced servers." She gestured toward Marcus, who was approaching with his characteristic warm smile. Diana's eyes narrowed as she saw Marcus. She turned to her friends and loudly whispered, "Can you believe this? They're putting us in that section." The emphasis she placed on that made her meaning crystal clear to everyone within earshot. Her friends shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke up. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor as he reached the group. "Good evening, ladies. Welcome to Bluestone. I'm Marcus, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." His voice was steady and warm, showing no sign that he'd heard Diana's earlier comment. "Well," Diana said, looking directly past Marcus to Sarah, "I suppose we'll have to make do, won't we?" She let out an exaggerated sigh. "But I want it noted that this isn't what I requested." As Marcus led them to their table, Diana made a show of inspecting everything: the chairs, the tablecloth, even the silverware. Her friends, Jane, Patricia, Susan, Barbara, and Margaret, followed her lead, though some looked embarrassed by her behavior. "Could you at least wipe down the table again?" Diana demanded, despite the surface being spotless. "I don't know who sat here before us." She pulled out a designer hand sanitizer from her purse and made a show of using it. Marcus calmly retrieved a clean cloth and sanitizer, wiping down the entire table again. "Of course, ma'am. Your comfort is our priority." His response was perfect, professional, and courteous, but Diana seemed determined to find fault. As he began presenting the wine list, Diana interrupted him. "I know what we want. Bring us 2 bottles of the Chateau Margaux." She waved her hand dismissively, not even looking at Marcus as she spoke. "Excellent choice, ma'am," Marcus responded, noting that she'd selected one of the most expensive wines on the menu. "Would you ladies like to hear about our specials this evening?" "I'm sure we can read the menu ourselves," Diana snapped, then turned to her friends. "Although I don't know why we stayed, the atmosphere isn't what it used to be." Her meaning was clear, and several nearby diners began shooting disapproving looks in her direction. Manager David Chen, who had been watching the situation unfold, approached the table. "Mrs. Walsh, is everything all right? Marcus is one of our finest servers." Diana put on a fake smile. "Oh, everything's fine. We're just adjusting to the changes in the establishment." She emphasized the word changes while glancing pointedly at Marcus. Throughout this exchange, Marcus maintained his composure, standing straight and professional. Other servers watched in admiration of his patience, while nearby diners began whispering among themselves about Diana's behavior. As Marcus walked away to fetch their wine, he could hear Diana's loud voice carrying across the restaurant. "Really, the neighborhood is just going downhill. I remember when this place had standards." The evening was just beginning, and already the tension in the air was palpable. Other diners were shooting sympathetic glances Marcus's way, while Diana's friends looked increasingly uncomfortable with her behavior. But no one could have predicted just how this dinner would eventually unfold, or the lasting impact it would have on everyone involved. The evening progressed with increasing tension as Marcus professionally handled Diana's table, despite her constant barrage of subtle and not-so-subtle insults. He returned with the expensive wine, presenting it with perfect form as he'd done thousands of times before. "I'll open this for you now," Marcus said, showing Diana the bottle of Chateau Margaux. Before he could begin the wine service, Diana interrupted him sharply. "Oh, let me see that," she demanded, snatching the bottle from his hands. She examined it like a detective searching for evidence. "Are you sure this is from the right year? The last thing we need is to be served some cheap knockoff." Her friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats as other diners started paying more attention to their table. Marcus calmly confirmed the vintage, his voice steady despite the insult to his professional integrity. "Yes, ma'am. This is the 2015 vintage you requested. Would you like to sample it?" As he began opening the wine, Diana turned to her friend Barbara and spoke loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "You know, I miss the days when fine dining meant something, when they had proper people serving." She emphasized the word proper while staring directly at Marcus's hands as he worked. Several diners at nearby tables started recording discreetly with their phones, sensing that something newsworthy was unfolding. The Reynolds family, celebrating their anniversary at a nearby table, looked particularly disturbed by Diana's behavior. When Marcus poured the wine sample, Diana made a show of inspecting it, holding the glass up to the light and swirling it dramatically. "I suppose this will have to do," she said with an exaggerated sigh, though unsure James would have selected a better bottle. As Marcus began taking their dinner orders, Diana interrupted every description he gave of the menu items. When he explained the evening's special, the sea bass, she rolled her eyes. "Is the fish fresh?" she demanded. "I mean, really fresh. Not just what you people consider fresh." The racist undertone in her voice was unmistakable. Marcus maintained his professionalism. "Yes, ma'am. All our seafood is delivered daily. Chef Giovanni personally inspects every delivery." "Well, we'll see about that," Diana muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. She then proceeded to order the sea bass, making several modifications to the dish that weren't typically allowed. Marcus noted everything without complaint. Throughout the ordering process, Diana's friends seemed to grow increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia, sitting closest to Diana, tried to change the subject several times, but Diana remained focused on finding fault with everything Marcus did. "And make sure the kitchen knows these orders are for my table," Diana added as Marcus finished taking their orders. "I know how things can get confused with certain servers." She smiled sweetly, but her eyes were cold. The surrounding tables had grown quieter, many people openly watching the situation unfold. Two teenage girls at a nearby table were whispering and pointing their phones toward Diana's table, while an elderly couple shook their heads in disapproval. As Marcus walked away to put in their orders, Diana's voice carried across the restaurant. "I can't believe they expect us to put up with this kind of service. I'm definitely speaking to the owner about the declining standards here." Back in the kitchen, Marcus took a deep breath as he entered the orders into the system. Chef Giovanni, who had heard about the situation, placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. "You're handling it like a pro, Marcus," Giovanni said. "Don't let her get to you." Marcus managed a small smile. "Thanks, Chef. Just another Friday night, right?" But everyone in the kitchen knew this wasn't just another Friday night. The tension was building, and the staff could feel it. Several servers had already reported complaints from other diners about Diana's behavior, and manager David Chen was keeping a close eye on the situation. As Marcus prepared to return to the dining room with their appetizers, he straightened his tie and took another deep breath. 6 years of experience had taught him how to handle difficult customers, but Diana Walsh was testing every ounce of his professional training and personal patience. Little did anyone know, the situation was about to escalate far beyond mere rude comments and racist undertones. The real drama of the evening was yet to unfold, and when it did, it would change more lives than just those of Marcus and Diana Walsh. The tension in Bluestone Restaurant reached its boiling point as Marcus returned with Diana Walsh's table's appetizers. The dining room had become unusually quiet, with other patrons paying more attention to table 20 than their own meals. "Here's your tuna tartare," Marcus announced professionally, placing the perfectly plated dish in front of Diana. The presentation was flawless. Ruby red tuna, arranged in a precise circle, garnished with microgreens and a delicate drizzle of wasabi aioli. Diana immediately scrunched her nose. "This doesn't look fresh," she declared, despite not having tasted it. "And it's not arranged the way James does it." She pushed the plate away like it was contaminated. "Take it back." Marcus maintained his composure. I apologize if the presentation isn't to your liking, ma'am. Would you like to try it first, or shall I have the kitchen prepare a new one? Are you suggesting I don't know what fresh tuna looks like? Diana's voice rose sharply. Several phones were now openly recording the scene. I spend summers in Martha's Vineyard. I think I know fresh fish when I see it. The situation escalated when the main courses arrived. Marcus carefully placed Diana's sea bass in front of her. The fish was perfectly cooked, its skin crispy and golden, nestled on a bed of roasted vegetables. Diana picked up her fork and dramatically stabbed at the fish. "This is cold," she announced, though steam was visibly rising from the plate. "I specifically asked for it to be hot. Did you leave it sitting under the heat lamp while you were chatting in the kitchen?" "I assure you, ma'am, the fish came directly from the kitchen," Marcus explained calmly. "But if it's not to your satisfaction, I'd be happy to have Chef Giovanni prepare a new one." "Chef Giovanni?" Diana scoffed. "More like Chef Microwave. The standards in this place have really gone downhill since they started hiring. Well." She left the racist implication hanging in the air. Several gasps could be heard from nearby tables. Patricia, one of Diana's friends, finally spoke up. "Diana, please. That's enough." But Diana was on a roll. She turned to her friends. "Oh, so now you're taking his side? I suppose next you'll tell me I should just accept subpar service because of some misguided political correctness." Marcus straightened his spine. "Ma'am, I understand you're unsatisfied. Would you like to speak with our manager?" "The manager?" Diana stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "The manager needs to know that customers like me are the reason this place stays in business. We don't come here to be served by." "Diana," Barbara interrupted, looking mortified. "Stop it." The entire restaurant was silent now. Every phone was recording. The Reynolds family at the next table had stood up in solidarity with Marcus. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to watch through the service window. That's when Diana reached for her soup bowl. "This soup is cold too," she declared, though she hadn't touched it. "Here, feel it yourself." In a shocking moment that seemed to unfold in slow motion, Diana Walsh swung her arm, intending to thrust the soup bowl toward Marcus. But in her anger, she miscalculated. Instead of pushing the bowl, her open palm connected directly with Marcus's cheek, the sharp crack of the slap echoing through the silent restaurant. The sound seemed to freeze time itself. Marcus stepped back, his hand instinctively rising to his cheek where an angry red mark was forming. Diana stood there, her hand still raised, a look of shock on her face as if she couldn't believe what she'd just done. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft jazz music playing ironically in the background and the quiet whir of the restaurant's air conditioning. Then Diana, perhaps realizing the gravity of what she'd done, attempted to backpedal. I didn't mean to. He moved into my hand," she sputtered, looking around at the sea of horrified faces. The entire restaurant waited with bated breath to see how Marcus would respond. His decades of professional training warred with his natural human instinct to defend himself. His next actions would not only define the remainder of the evening, but would become a viral moment that would spark important conversations about racism, respect, and dignity in the service industry. No one could have predicted what Marcus would do next, least of all Diana Walsh. The silence that followed the slap lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Marcus Thompson stood tall, his cheek still stinging from Diana Walsh's assault, while dozens of phones captured every moment. The choice he made next would change everything. With remarkable composure, Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands were steady as he unlocked it, despite the adrenaline surely coursing through his system. "Mrs. Walsh," he said, his voice calm and clear, "I'm calling the police to report an assault." Diana's face transformed from shock to panic. "You're what?" she sputtered, her previous arrogance crumbling. "Don't be ridiculous. I barely touched you." 911, what's your emergency?" The operator's voice was clearly audible in the silent restaurant. Marcus spoke professionally. "I'd like to report an assault at Bluestone Restaurant on 457 Madison Avenue. I'm a waiter here, and a customer just slapped me in front of dozens of witnesses." "You can't do this," Diana shrieked, looking around frantically at her friends for support. But they had all stepped away from her, creating a visible distance between themselves and her actions. Barbara was already gathering her purse, clearly planning her escape from the situation. Manager David Chen stepped forward, placing himself between Marcus and Diana. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm going to have to ask you to remain here until the police arrive. We have security cameras, and as you can see," he gestured to the dozens of phones still recording, "plenty of witnesses." An older gentleman from the Reynolds table stood up. "I saw the whole thing," he announced. "I'm a retired judge, and I'll be happy to provide a statement." "Young man," he nodded to Marcus, "you handled this with incredible dignity." Diana's face went from red to pale as she realized the severity of her situation. "This is absurd. Do you know who I am? I'm on the board of the country club. My husband plays golf with the mayor. And I'm sure they'll all be very interested in seeing this video," said a young woman who had been recording everything. She turned her phone screen toward Diana, showing the crystal clear footage of the assault. Within minutes, 2 police officers entered the restaurant. Officer Sarah Rodriguez and Officer James Wilson approached the scene professionally, immediately separating Diana from the group. "I'd like to press charges," Marcus stated firmly, still maintaining his composure. This was an unprovoked assault motivated by racial prejudice. There are multiple witnesses and video evidence. The officers began taking statements while Diana became increasingly hysterical. "This is ridiculous. I demand to speak to your supervisor. This person has ruined my dinner." Officer Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, you're being charged with assault. Your dinner should be the least of your concerns right now." As the police collected witness statements, the video of the incident was already spreading across social media. #BluestoneKaren and #JusticeForMarcus were trending locally within hours. Chef Giovanni emerged from the kitchen with an ice pack for Marcus's cheek. "You're a better man than most," he said quietly, patting Marcus on the shoulder. The entire kitchen staff stood in solidarity behind him. Diana's friends had completely abandoned her by this point. Patricia was giving her statement to the police, explicitly mentioning Diana's racist comments throughout the evening. Barbara was already in an Uber, having texted her husband to meet with their lawyer first thing in the morning to distance themselves from Diana socially and professionally. The other diners in the restaurant had formed an impromptu support group for Marcus. The Reynolds family insisted on paying for his legal representation if needed. A local news reporter who happened to be dining there was already preparing a story about how a professional waiter's dignified response to racism and assault was inspiring the community. As Diana was escorted out of the restaurant, she had lost all her previous bravado. The reality of her actions was finally sinking in as Officer Wilson read her rights. Her perfectly styled hair was now disheveled, her designer dress wrinkled, and her mascara smeared from crying. Marcus watched the scene unfold, still standing straight and professional in his uniform. He had hit back, not with violence, with something far more powerful, dignity, and the proper application of justice. His response would soon become a teaching moment for service workers everywhere, showing that standing up for oneself doesn't require lowering oneself to the aggressor's level. The night was far from over, and the repercussions of Diana Walsh's actions were only beginning to unfold. By the next morning, the video of Diana Walsh's assault on Marcus Thompson had gone viral. Local news stations played the clip on repeat, and social media exploded with reactions. While Marcus slept peacefully, knowing he had handled the situation correctly, Diana's world was crumbling around her. At 8:00 a.m., Diana's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her husband, Richard Walsh, paced their luxury home's living room, speaking frantically with their lawyer. The local news was playing on their 65-inch TV, showing Diana's face and the incident from multiple angles. Breaking news. Local executive caught on camera assaulting waiter in racist attack, the headline screamed. Diana sat on her imported leather sofa, still in her silk pajamas, watching her reputation disintegrate in real time. "What do you mean they're calling an emergency board meeting?" Richard shouted into his phone. He was speaking to his friend at the country club, where Diana served as a board member. She's been on that board for 15 years. The doorbell rang, making Diana jump. Through the security camera, she could see reporters gathering outside their gates. Some held microphones, others cameras, all waiting for a statement from the woman now dubbed Bluestone Karen by the internet. Her phone buzzed with a text from her employer, Midwest Financial Services, where she served as Vice President of Client Relations. Emergency meeting. 10 a.m. Zoom link attached. The message was cold and formal, nothing like the friendly communications she usually received from her CEO. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus's phone was also buzzing nonstop. But his messages were different. Support, job offers, interview requests from major networks, and even a call from a civil rights attorney offering to represent him pro bono. Back at the Walsh residence, Diana's social circle was rapidly shrinking. Her country club friends were mass unfollowing her on social media. The charity organizations she chaired were quietly removing her name from their websites. Even her yoga instructor sent a text. Perhaps it's best to take a break from group classes for now. At 10 a.m. sharp, Diana sat in front of her laptop for the emergency meeting with her company. Her usually perfect makeup couldn't hide her puffy eyes or the stressed lines that had appeared overnight. Diana, her CEO, began gravely. The board has reviewed the footage. Your actions directly violate our company's zero-tolerance policy regarding discrimination and workplace violence. Even though this occurred outside the office, as a vice president, you represent our company at all times. But I brought in millions in accounts, Diana protested weakly. And now those same accounts are calling to dissolve their relationships with us, the CEO replied. We're placing you on indefinite suspension, effective immediately. By noon, Diana's lawyer had received notice that the district attorney's office was pursuing enhanced charges due to the hate crime elements of the assault. The footage clearly captured her racist comments leading up to the physical attack. Local businesses began posting signs. All customers welcome. No Karens allowed. The internet had turned Diana Walsh into a meme, with her face appearing in countless videos and posts about entitled behavior and racism. Her daughter called from college, crying, Mom, my roommate just found out you're my mother. She's requesting a room change. How could you do this? The country club board's decision came swiftly, immediate termination of her membership. Their email cited their commitment to diversity and inclusion, the very initiatives Diana had openly mocked during board meetings. By evening, Diana's carefully constructed social status had completely unraveled. Her husband returned from his law office looking defeated. The partners are concerned about association with the firm, he said quietly. They're suggesting I take a leave of absence. Local news vans remained parked outside their gate. Social media continued to explode with new hashtags. Hashtag cancel Karen, hashtag justice for Marcus, and hashtag Bluestone Karen were trending nationally now. Diana sat in her dark home office, illuminated only by her computer screen, reading countless comments condemning her actions. The carefully crafted image she built over decades, philanthropist, community leader, respected businesswoman, had been destroyed in less than 24 hours. As she scrolled through the endless negative comments, one particular tweet caught her eye. It was from Marcus Thompson. I believe in forgiveness and growth. Let's turn this incident into a teaching moment about respect, dignity, and treating all people with kindness. The contrast between his grace and her behavior only made Diana's fall from grace more profound. And tomorrow would bring even more consequences as the legal process began to unfold. 2 weeks after the incident at Bluestone Restaurant, the legal consequences for Diana Walsh began to materialize in earnest. The county courthouse buzzed with activity as Diana, now dressed in a modest navy suit instead of her usual designer outfits, walked through metal detectors for her preliminary hearing. Gone were her usual entourage and confident strut. Her husband Richard walked beside her, both trying to avoid the cameras that flashed continuously. Her once perfectly styled hair was now simply pulled back, and she wore minimal makeup, a stark contrast to her previous polished appearance. Inside the courtroom, Marcus sat with his pro bono attorney, Maria Rodriguez, who had built a strong case. The evidence was overwhelming. Dozens of witness statements, multiple video angles, and security camera footage that captured not only the slap, but also Diana's racist comments throughout the evening. All rise. The bailiff, called as Judge Thompson, no relation to Marcus, entered the courtroom. The judge, an African-American woman in her 60s, surveyed the packed gallery with experienced eyes. Diana's expensive criminal defense attorney tried to paint the incident as a simple misunderstanding. Your Honor, my client was merely gesturing in frustration. Any contact was completely accidental. The prosecution played the viral video, which now had over 20 million views online. The sound of the slap echoed through the courtroom speakers, followed by Diana's clear voice attempting to blame Marcus. Several jurors shook their heads in disgust. Furthermore, the prosecutor continued, "We have evidence of Mrs. Walsh's history of discriminatory behavior. She presented complaints from 3 other restaurants and 2 former household employees, all describing similar racist incidents." During a break in proceedings, Diana's lawyer desperately tried to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecutor's terms were clear: guilty plea to assault with a hate crime enhancement, mandatory anger management classes, racial sensitivity training, community service, and a significant fine. And, the prosecutor added, a public apology to Mr. Thompson. Diana, finally understanding the severity of her situation, accepted the terms. Her voice trembled as she stood before the judge. "Mrs. Walsh," Judge Thompson spoke firmly, "this court accepts your plea agreement with additional conditions. You will complete 200 hours of community service, specifically in minority communities. You will attend weekly anger management sessions for 1 year. You will complete an intensive diversity and inclusion program." The judge continued, "You will also pay a fine of $25,000, which will be donated to organizations promoting racial equality in the service industry. Finally, you are banned from entering any restaurant in the county for 6 months." Diana nodded meekly, a far cry from her previous arrogant demeanor. Her husband sat in the gallery, looking at his phone as their country club friends continued to distance themselves publicly on social media. Meanwhile, Marcus's example had sparked a national conversation. Major restaurant chains were updating their policies on customer harassment. The state legislature was considering a bill to increase penalties for assaulting service workers. #ServiceWorkerRespect had become a movement. Local news stations interviewed Diana's former friends. Looking back, Barbara admitted on camera, "We all saw signs of this behavior but said nothing. We're part of the problem if we stay silent." Diana's former employer, Midwest Financial Services, announced a company-wide initiative for diversity training. They'd hired Marcus as a consultant, valuing his insights on handling discrimination with dignity. After the hearing, Diana read her public apology, cameras recording every word. "I am deeply ashamed of my actions," she read, her voice shaking. "My behavior was inexcusable. Mr. Thompson showed me what true class and dignity look like. I have begun to understand the depth of my prejudices and am committed to changing." Marcus, who had chosen to attend the hearing, listened quietly. When reporters asked for his response, he simply said, "I hope Mrs. Walsh uses this experience to grow. Change starts with acknowledging our mistakes." As Diana left the courthouse, she faced a different world than the one she'd known 2 weeks ago. Her social media accounts were deleted, her country club membership revoked, her business relationships severed. She would now spend her weekends serving meals at homeless shelters instead of attending charity galas. The incident had created ripples far beyond that Friday night at Bluestone. Restaurant workers across the country shared their own stories of abuse and discrimination, starting a larger movement for respect and dignity in the service industry. As Diana drove home with her husband in silence, she passed a billboard that had just been erected. "Respect is served here. End restaurant worker harassment." The image on the billboard was Marcus's smiling face. 6 months after the infamous slat that went viral, Bluestone Restaurant had become a symbol of change in the service industry. On a warm Friday evening, Marcus Thompson adjusted his new manager's blazer, standing proudly in front of the restaurant's entrance where a freshly installed plaque read, "Respect served daily." The restaurant had undergone significant changes. Marcus's promotion to manager was just the beginning. Owner Michael Chen had implemented a zero-tolerance policy for customer harassment, and their story had inspired restaurants nationwide to follow suit. Inside, Marcus walked through the dining room, now decorated with framed news articles about the incident and its positive aftermath. The most prominent display showed a photo of Marcus receiving a Community Leadership Award from the mayor, alongside the viral video that had started it all. "Table 20 looks different now, doesn't it?" Jenny, the former trainee now head server, commented as she passed by. The once infamous table had been transformed into a special Respect Zone booth, where local schools brought students to learn about dignity in the workplace. Meanwhile, across town, Diana Walsh was completing her final hours of community service at Hope Kitchen, a soup kitchen serving homeless individuals. She wore a simple volunteer apron, her designer clothes long forgotten. The past 6 months had changed her profoundly. "More soup, Mr. Johnson?" Diana asked kindly, serving an elderly homeless man. Her hands, once adorned with expensive manicures, now showed signs of honest work. The man smiled and thanked her, something she'd learned to appreciate. Back at Bluestone, Marcus welcomed a special group, 20 restaurant managers from across the state, attending his first Dignity in Service training seminar. The program, developed from his experience, was becoming mandatory training in restaurants throughout the country. "Welcome," Marcus began, standing confidently before the group. "Today we'll discuss how to handle discrimination while maintaining professional dignity. My story is just one of many, but it taught us all valuable lessons." The local news crew setting up in the corner was barely noticeable now. Media attention had become routine. Marcus's story had been featured on national morning shows, and he'd even been invited to speak at congressional hearings on workplace harassment. As Marcus conducted his training, Diana was finishing her shift at Hope Kitchen. She gathered her things, checking her phone for the first time in hours. Her social media accounts, once filled with country club photos and luxury vacations, now showed her volunteer work and reflective posts about personal growth. She had one important stop to make before heading home. Today marked the end of her restaurant ban, and she had requested a meeting with Marcus at Bluestone. Her hands trembled slightly as she drove there. When Diana entered Bluestone, the restaurant fell silent. But this time, it wasn't out of disgust, it was curiosity. She looked different now. Humility had softened her features, and genuine remorse had replaced her former arrogance. Marcus met her at the entrance. "Mrs. Walsh," he greeted her professionally. "Please," she said quietly, "call me Diana." She handed him an envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000, double her court-mandated fine, made out to Marcus's new foundation for promoting respect in the service industry. "I can't take credit for changing on my own," Diana admitted. "But hitting rock bottom opened my eyes. Your dignity in handling my horrible behavior taught me more than any sensitivity training could." Marcus accepted the check with a nod. "Change is possible when we acknowledge our mistakes and work to be better," he said, the same words he'd been teaching in his seminars. The restaurant had transformed into more than just a dining establishment. It was now a training center, a symbol of change, and a testament to how one person's dignity could inspire nationwide reform. As Diana left the restaurant, she passed a group of servers in training, all wearing badges that read "Dignity First." The hostess stand displayed a framed set of principles: respect all, serve with pride, stand with dignity. Marcus watched her leave, then returned to his training session. On the wall behind him hung a large photo of that fateful night, but it wasn't the moment of the slap. It was the moment after, when he chose dignity over retaliation. Below it was inscribed, "Real strength isn't in striking back, but in standing tall." The story of the racist Karen and the dignified waiter had become more than just a viral video. It had sparked a movement, changed lives, and proved that sometimes the strongest way to hit back is to not hit at all, but to stand firm in one's dignity and let justice take its course. As the sun set on Bluestone Restaurant, Marcus smiled, knowing that Table 20 would never be the same, and neither would the service industry. The end of this story had become the beginning of something much bigger.